Okay, I guess the reason you're here is that you know my topic, and I'm sort of sandwiched between Tryon talks on Hawthorne Wingo in the past, Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, Thomas Wolfe, the Lanier Library, and I think it's in the next month or two, Andy Haynes is going to talk about Lefty and Nora Flynn, and I'm sandwiched in between with Murder and Mayhem. Upbeat topics versus murder and mayhem. And the topic and the incident that I'm going to talk about and the time that I'm going to talk about is like perhaps arguably is the low point of human and community behavior in the 150-year history of Tryon. So don't expect me to be discussing any profiles in courage, with one exception. You're going to hear me describe what this one exception did. It was an SBI agent by the name of Claude Davis from Asheville. He came down here from out of town, outside the community, did his thing, and if his lead had been followed, justice probably would have been done in this unfortunate situation 66 years ago. That's the one profile in courage that you'll see. I considered a light version of this, but fact is, murders don't lend themselves to light treatment, and homicide cases turn on detail. So you're going to hear a lot of detail. I asked Julia about this, conferred with Julia about the challenge that I have here, and conferring with her, I'm going to read this material for the sake of accuracy and completeness and efficiency. But I can assure you that I'll take more time than a TED Talk and some less time than 2 episodes of a Ken Burns documentary. This murder occurred on Sunday morning, May the 24th, 1953. There was a coroner's inquiry into that murder on the 4th of June, and then there was a preliminary hearing in Columbus in a related assault case on the 19th of June. Then there was a Superior Court jury trial on the related assault case the 27th of August. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different proceedings and the facts that came out then, because we're all about the facts. You don't have to know too much about the law to understand. I think, to relate to these facts and apply common sense, which is what a jury verdict is all about. But as you can see, this incident pretty much occupied the summer of 1953 in the town of Tryon. At the end of the summer, Labor Day came along. It was sort of forgotten until now. But with that introduction, let's get into this. The Tryon Theater murder of 1953. Now, my report is on this subject is based largely on newspaper articles found by Pat McCool and Keith Bowman, a Vermonter with Tryon connections. And this event was covered by the Associated Press and UPI, and it was widely reported in the Carolinas from Rocky Mount to Florence, Greenville, and Asheville. Of course, it was closely followed by the Tryon Daily Bulletin, and I'm indebted to former employee up there, Claire Sash, as well as to the present staff for allowing me into their archives as late as this morning as I pursued one more factual tidbit. It's a treasure trove of Tryon history up there. It's just incredible. I also had the privilege of reading the 60-page, fact-dense, 66-year-old, very revealing State Bureau of Investigation report in this homicide. But most importantly, in my study of this topic have been the recollections and perspectives of old-time Tryonites, among them Tom Kell, my lifetime friend, Ambrose Mills, longtime Tryonite, Alan Pruitt, Franklin McKegg, Jimmy and Francis McCain. Francis is here, unfortunately Jimmy can't be, and Howard Williams, and others. But, okay, May 1953. In May 1953, Ike had been president for 4 months, and Elizabeth was due to be coronated queen, and murder didn't happen in Tryon, North Carolina. Peter Pan was a popular film in 1953 and was shown at the 15-year-old Tryon Theater, with an R-E, where admission was 15 cents for kids and 45 for adults. A baccalaureate service for graduating Tryon High School seniors was scheduled for the evening of Sunday, May the 24th, with Methodist minister H.A. Tryon delivering the invocation for the class of 53, which included Franklin McKegg, those of us who know Franklin. I was a 5.5-year-old in the Sunday school of the Tryon Methodist Church, which stood on East Howard Street at the rear of the present-day Stotts Ford Garage. New member, and across from the Toy House, the building's still over there, saw it a few minutes ago. New members, including Edward Ball, who was the manager of the Tryon Theater, were to be received during the Sunday service. Almost 7 months later, on December the 19th, the day after my 6th birthday, the Asheville Citizen-Times carried a letter to the editor from Reverend Tryon of the Tryon Methodist Church titled "A Card at Christmas." It read in part, "This afternoon I received a card which truly stirred my heart more than any I've received to date, a card signed by M.E. Ball and family. The chair will be vacant at Christmas time in the Ball home. Their son Edward made his profession of faith during the Methodist mission held in our church last May. Before he could leave the Tryon Theater that fateful Sunday morning of May 24th, he was murdered. I was informed of this by one of the ushers who handed me a note when he came up for the offering plate during our morning worship service a few minutes before we received new members into the church. The note indicated that Edward could not be with the group as he had just been killed."
Good excuse.
My daughter, who understands these things, just shook her head. So this sounds like a Lifetime movie. I'm not sure exactly what that is. Okay. Edward Ball, the theater man as he came to be known. And this was the best photo available. I did the best I could. This was out of one of the newspapers, a photo. Edward Ball, 30 years old at the time of his death, was from the Raleigh-Durham area. He'd been employed by Stewart and Everett Theaters of Charlotte for 7 years and came to Tryon from Kannapolis in January 1952 to manage our downtown theater as well as the Lake Lanier Drive-In, which was located where the Tryon Plaza now sits opposite the lake entrance. Both theaters were owned by R.E. Brantley of Tryon, who represented Polk County in the North Carolina House. Ball was described as quiet, friendly, well-liked, and cooperative in local affairs. He spoke to everyone and had no known enemies. Tryon citizens were reported to be saddened and puzzled by his death. His general manager described him as a hard worker, conscientious, and honest, but he added that Ball had become involved with a married woman, perhaps several, when he worked in Charlotte. The manager also had to warn him about his involvement with a married lady in Tryon, Stella Rhodes. Ball responded, "I'll leave her alone if she'll leave me alone." Not a good position. Representative Brantley also had more recently warned Ball, and more pointedly so, telling him to stop seeing Mrs. Rhodes or he would likely be killed. Tryon Police Chief Lewis Lindsay stated to media that the manager usually went to the theater on Sunday morning at 10 to prepare for the afternoon performance, a 3 o'clock matinee. The crime scene. Theater projectionist Cletus Presley reported for work with his brother Sidney just after 10:30 that Sunday morning to get the film ready for the day's showing. At about 10:55, they were shocked to find the theater manager slumped over, face down in a pool of blood in the foyer, to the right of the main entrance doors, which are the same today as they were then, thanks to the lanes, and about 10 feet from the theater office near the men's room, and it's the same men's room. I give you that detail so that every time you go to the theater from now on, you can think about that. As a 5.5, 6-year-old, this freaked me out for years. And just about the time I kind of got over this, my brother and I convinced my mother to let us go see this movie, The Monster of the Black Lagoon. Well, there was another 2 or 3 years. But the configuration of the theater has changed in recent years. What is now the area where refreshments are sold was then rows of seating all the way to the back wall. In 1953, refreshments were available at a counter against the wall immediately inside and straight ahead of the entrance doors when you entered. Ball's body was found there to the right of that concession counter. Cletus Presley called the police department a half a block away. Coroner Otis O. Dalton was also sent for. Now this is the Tryon Police Department at the time. Sat there on the corner opposite the Tryon Horse, and you can, I think today we would call that the Tryon Police Kiosk, possibly. It was all we had. Too bad it's not still there. Investigators found that Ball had been shot in the chin just below the teeth by a .38 caliber pistol, the bullet then traveling upward, entering the brain and lodging against the back of the skull. Opening his shirt, they were surprised to find a fresh additional gunshot wound to the right shoulder that had been dressed with gauze and covered with cloth at some previous time. A .22 caliber projectile was later found in that wound. Nothing in the theater seemed to be disturbed that would indicate robbery as a motive. Keys were in Ball's hand, and $8 were in his pants pocket. His car, that's about a 1946-47 Plymouth. His car was parked on the street in front of the theater with 5 .22 caliber bullet holes in the right back near the rear window. His killer had followed it into the hospital or entered somehow to lay in wait. Officers found what they described as a man's footprints from a thicket at the rear of the theater and back in the general direction to the north toward the Tryon Cemetery, which was a quarter mile or more away. Otherwise, there was no clue as to who the assailant might have been. Coroner Dalton gave permission for Edward Ball's body to be removed to McFarland's funeral home, which was then on North Trade Street, where Tryon Federal Bank is now located. Projectionist Cletus Presley and others then proceeded to thoroughly clean up the blood and wash the walls, floor, and concession area, effectively destroying the crime scene. State Bureau of Investigation officers arrived about 4 p.m. and noted that there was no crime scene left to be examined for fingerprints or other evidence of value. The entrance area of the theater was spotless, probably the cleanest it's ever been, until now. The rear of the building had been trampled, and Ball's gray Plymouth automobile had been handled, examined, and inspected by the public before agents arrived. The Tryon Daily Bulletin, always looking for a positive spin, reported that traffic and sightseers driving by and walking have doubled. Good for downtown. TDA would love to hear that. SBI agent Claude Davis from Asheville asked Police Chief Lindsay who had allowed the crime scene to be sanitized before the state investigators arrived, why officers made no attempt to protect it. The chief said that he was so nervous and upset over the matter that he didn't exactly know. He stated that he had about had a nervous breakdown. Ambrose Mills. Now let's just look at his hair. Ambrose was a man ahead of his time. And it was just, hey, Ambrose, you know, you apply some of that black shoe polish, it looks the same way today. It's great. Ambrose Mills, right there. Thank you, Ambrose. Ambrose Mills said that he went to church at Holy Cross Episcopal on Melrose Avenue that Sunday morning, and when he traveled back down to Trade Street, there was quite a disturbance, vehicles and a crowd. Howard Williams left the Baptist church to see the theater block nearly filled with parked cars and with curiosity seekers coming and going in and around the theater with no interference by police officers. Jimmy McCain, Francis is here, Jimmy's not, but that's Jimmy. Junior, I believe, at Tryon School at the time. He looks just like that now, doesn't he? Doesn't he? Of course he does. Jimmy McCain stated that he went to the theater with the rest of the growing crowd of curiosity seekers, but he chose to see only the legs of Edward Ball there in the foyer. Franklin McKay, there he is, senior picture. Franklin McKegg says that he was well acquainted with Ed Ball, that he lived just down the street from him, and rode with him to Asheville on Saturday, May the 23rd, the day before the murder, where they spent most of the day. On Sunday morning, Franklin walked uptown to loaf, the way young guys did, as Franklin described it to me recently, and joined the multitude entering the theater to take a look under the disinterested eyes of the chief of police. There he saw his friend's body with theater custodian Mary Cox mopping up blood that ran into the theater and down the aisle. That frightened Franklin. He left Tryon to join the Marine Corps for 3 years. You think Franklin's lying about that? So the Tryon Daily Bulletin Archives has every issue for 1953, and I looked through a lot of them. About October that year, there's Franklin graduating from Paris Island. So, stayed gone for 3 years. The investigation. Okay. Alan Pruitt, a junior at Tryon School at the time. Investigators trying, I'll tell him you said that. Darling? Okay. Investigators trying to explain the 2 separate bullet wounds inflicted at different times spoke to residents of Markham Road who'd heard pistol shots early in the morning at about 2 to 3 a.m. Alan Pruitt heard them from his bedroom window just up from the Rhodes house. Officers learned that Edward Ball had been shot in a separate incident and his automobile shot into about 8 hours before he was fatally wounded at the Tryon Theater. Logic indicated that the same assailant very likely committed the 2 crimes. After the assault, Ball drove to the Lake Lanier Drive-In Theater office and called his friend, Tryon florist, Ed Goodyear. Okay, you old-timers here, you're going to start to hear some familiar names, okay? Calls Ed Goodyear at about 3 a.m. asking for help in finding a doctor. Goodyear told police that he led Ball and a female companion, Stella Rhodes, to the home of George Vosberg, a young physician, and last saw the theater manager on Vosberg's front porch. The doctor dressed a gunshot wound to the right shoulder, but told Ball that the projectile could not be removed at that time. He advised him to report to Old St. Luke's Hospital on Carolina Drive later in the day to have the injury taken care of. Ball's only explanation to Goodyear and Vosberg was, "I was with the wrong people." It seems that when Ball left the physician's home, he went to his apartment in the W.Y. Wilkins Senior residence, which stood at the intersections of Highways 108 and 176, the place now occupied by the Triangle Stop convenience store. Ball seemed to be all right, not upset, and said nothing about trouble with anyone, according to his landlord. He left the apartment at about 10 o'clock Sunday morning in his bullet-riddled automobile en route to his theater job. Blood was later found on the bed where Ball slept that night. Very much alive at 10 o'clock that morning and probably dressed for church, by 10:30 Edward Ball was very much dead. The critical 30-minute time frame would become the focus of investigators. Police Chief Lindsay said that he had not been informed by Dr. Vosberg of the early morning shooting incident as required by law until after Ball's death. Vosberg examined the body at the hospital later in the day, removed the 2 projectiles of different calibers from the head and shoulder, but there was no autopsy performed. He completed the death certificate, which describes the cause of the death simply as shot through the head. Amen. The location of the nighttime gunshots and probably town talk on that Sunday caused officers to make Jess Rhodes and his wife Stella persons of interest in the Ball assault and homicide. Stella Rhodes was the female who was supposed to have been involved with Ed Ball and was with him when he went to get his first gunshot wound treated in the early morning hours of that day. The Rhodes lived in a house very near the intersection of Grady Avenue and Markham Road where the nighttime gunshots were heard. That house is gone now, but it sat on the high ground at the top of today's White Oak Apartments where they front on Markham Road. Jess Rhodes. Jesse Lorenzo Rhodes, The husband of Ed Ball's love interest was a 52-year-old member of a pioneer family that went back at least 5 generations in Polk County. He was well known, having run a service station in Tryon, and more recently, he kept a grape vineyard and truck farm on the east side of town at the place on the ridge just beyond the Good Shepherd Episcopal Church out Markham Road. That's where Rhodes would say he was at the time Ed Ball was killed, 5 minutes from downtown. Jess Rhodes, and I'm quoting newspaper articles from time to time here, Jess Rhodes, small in stature but powerful politically, was very much a well-connected insider in local politics and an experienced and reliable fixer of elections. He'd been the county accountant and served as chairman of the Polk County Board of Elections. I mean, that's the guy you want to have chairman of the Board of Elections. He fixed it. And he had friends in high places and low, some of them known then as his cronies. He also had a constellation of blood relatives and was close to law officers. He was known as quiet and easygoing, but with nerve. He was not to be trifled with, was known for direct, overt action, and for good bootleg whiskey, both as a consumer and a producer. Howard Williams and Franklin McKegg saw the friends of Jess Rhodes helping clean up the bloody mess in the theater before state investigators arrived. Ezell Foster, a Rhodes crony, set up a floodlight to illuminate the scene for the curious who came and went. State Representative Brantley also joined in the cleansing. He owned the theater. Stella Stredwick Rhodes. Stella Stredwick Rhodes, that's her on the right. There's kind of a forecast of things to come there in the newspaper headline, but that's Stella Rhodes. Stella Stredwick Rhodes was 45 years old when the 30-year-old theater manager was killed. Her father, Ed Stredwick, and his family are more than worthy of a Tryon talk in their own right, and I'll take just a moment to tell you who they were. He came to Tryon from Pennsylvania in about 1880 when the town was just getting its start with the coming of the railroad. As a youth, he worked at McAvoy's, which was Mimosa in Lynn, and at Oak Hall Hotel in Tryon, and was a great friend of Sidney Lanier. The two would play flute, banjo, and dulcimer on the banks of the Packlet River. In those days of horse-drawn conveyance, Ed Stredwick ran a busy livery stable that was located across from the Tryon Depot where the former McCall dental offices were located. As the town became a popular tourist destination, he transported visitors to McAvoy's, the Log Cabin Inn on White Oak Mountain, and elsewhere. Another of his daughters, Stella Rhodes' sister, was Sally Stredwick Cathy, well known in Tryon and in the Tryon and regional craft scene, and the owner of Blue Ridge Weavers on Trade Street. Jess Rhodes, about 7 years her senior, married Sally Stredwick in 1922 when she was 15 years old. They had their only child, a daughter Janelle, the following year. Stella ran the bargain center on Maple Street in Tryon. Daughter Janelle told investigators that her parents had been separated 3 times for as long as 5 years on one occasion. She said that her father had a violent temper, too, probably, and that she had no respect for it. Present-day surviving witness to those days around Tryon, Howard Williams, says in summary that at the time, people were surprised that Jess Rhodes had not shot someone over Stella before the Ball incident. On the morning of Tuesday, May the 26th, 1953, the Statesville Daily Record ran an article titled, "County Leader Held for Death," and the Tryon Daily Bulletin reported the news in the Curb Reporter. Jesse Rhodes had been arrested late Monday on 2 criminal warrants. One charging the murder of Edwin Ball was sworn to by Ball's brother-in-law from Apex, North Carolina. Janelle Rhodes Dalton, supported by a written statement from her mother, swore to a second arrest warrant charging her father with aggravated assault on her mother Stella by shooting at her on Markham Road on the previous Sunday evening. Jess Rhodes was confined at the county jail without bond, with the cases set for preliminary hearing later in the week. Interestingly, in a comment that harkened back to the original sin of the Garden of Eden, the arresting officer, Chief Deputy Sheriff Sel Edwards, said, "It looks like it was caused by a woman." I mean, aren't they just responsible for everything? I mean, guys, you know, looks like it was caused by a woman. Call your next case. Police Chief Lindsay was looking for Stella Rhodes to throw light on the death of Edward Ball. Daughter Janelle had taken her to Asheville to stay with a relative. With her husband behind bars, she returned to Tryon, but was still certain that her husband would kill her at the first opportunity. Typical of the headlines across the Carolinas on Thursday, May the 28th, was Tryon woman names mate as a sailor. In the Tryon Daily Bulletin, the Curb reporter simply stated that Ms. J.L. Rhodes said that she was in a car with Ed Ball when it was shot into Sunday morning at 2:30 p.m. AP reports were more detailed. Tryon Assistant Police Chief J.M. Melton said that an attractive dress shop owner named her husband, Jessel Rhodes, as the person who fired on her and Edward Ball as they sat in his parked car near her home early Sunday morning. And that car, as I mentioned, was about a 46 to 48 Plymouth Deluxe. 8 hours before he was shot dead in the Tryon Theater, Stella Rhodes told investigators that a wild chase followed. She and Ball, a bachelor, the media was certain to point out, were pursued by a 1951 Mercury two-door driven by her husband across the South Carolina state line and back. At some point, Ed Ball said, "Jess has shot me." The slim, youthful-looking Rhodes, as he was described in the newspaper, denied any part in the shooting. Officers said that he appeared in good spirits and showed no sign of weakening under the strain. They were concerned about his welfare, obviously. The solicitor of Polk County, now known as District Attorney, was Clarence O. Ridings, a native of the Green Creek section of the county, who had practiced law in Forest City and became solicitor in the 1930s. Ridings was also noted as an adept prosecutor and as a political animal who had a taste for the bottle. I mean, all these people have a taste for the bottle. Some things just haven't changed very much. Ridings stated that Rhodes would be held without bond until the following week when preliminary hearings were to be had on the charges of assault on his wife and first-degree murder and the death of Ed Ball. If all went as expected, Rhodes would appear at the August term of Polk County Superior Court, but the unexpected lay just ahead. Officers continued their hunt for a murder weapon, searching for pistols. They ransacked the Rhodes house on Markham Road and a tenant house and truck farm just outside the city limits beyond the Tryon Cemetery at Rhodes Vineyard, but again, no clues were found. SBI agent Davis had further conversation with Ball's friend Edward Goodyear, who ran his florist shop just 2 doors up from the Tryon Theater where Bill's Jewelers has been. Goodyear said he'd seen no one, including maybe especially Stella Rhodes, with Ed Ball during the early morning hours of May 24th when he led led Ball to Dr. Glassberg's. Didn't see him with anybody. Goodyear would later testify that he did in fact see Stella and Ed together, and in a follow-up interview with Goodyear, Goodyear said to the investigating SBI agent that he thought he saw a woman when he arrived at the Lake Lanier Theater to meet Ed Ball, but that, quote, if he stated who the woman was, it would ruin one of the best families in Tryon. The coroner's inquest. The coroner's inquest. In early June, Coroner Otis Dalton, a farmer who had no formal legal training, announced the name of 6 men to serve on a coroner's jury that was to determine how Ed Ball came to his death. Coincidentally, 3 of the 6 men shared the name Gosnell. It was reported to the SBI that a Jess Rhodes crony and a powerful political force, Harrison Bridgman of Tryon, not the coroner, was the person who actually selected the 6-man jury. One of the members was Rob Ford, who had been involved in making bootleg brandy with Jess Rhodes, Bridgman, and the local highway patrolman. Another member of that jury panel was the brother of a man who testified as a character witness and alibi witness for Rhodes. A third was a very close personal friend of Rhodes, according to his daughter. It can be said with confidence that the coroner's jury was carefully rigged in Rhodes' favor. Coincidentally, County Coroner Dalton had a close family connection to Jess Rhodes as well. His son Roy was married to Jess's daughter, Janelle. I suppose they had Thanksgiving together. You can see how the cards are stacking up. The inquest was held on Thursday, June the 4th at 2 p.m. in the main courtroom of the county courthouse. It said that a record crowd, 300 men, women, and children, many of them in court for the first time, attended the proceeding that summer afternoon, standing room only, with the press there in force to hear evidence in the murder of the theater man, as it come to be known. Two of those in the audience were Ambrose Mills. Yeah. He was right there, one of the 300. Two of those in the audience were Ambrose Mills and Howard Williams. Ed Ball's brother-in-law was also there, and Jess and Stella's daughter, Janelle. The attorneys for Jess Rhodes were headed by politically powerful Monroe M. Redden of Hendersonville, a former congressman. Also appearing were his son, Monroe Jr., as well as politically active and well-connected Polk County attorneys J. Lee Lavender and W.A. Bill McFarland. In the next day's Greenville News, coverage began by reporting to readers that Jess Rhodes was out of jail, free to go back to his vineyard in Tryon and his widespread political activities. The murder charge against the powerful political figure was dropped at the conclusion of the inquest. The jury, not surprisingly, returned a verdict that Ball was murdered by a party or parties unknown to this jury. The article went on to state that rumors are plentiful in Tryon and Columbus, but no witness placed on the stand this afternoon could connect Rhodes to the fatal killing. Mrs. Rhodes was called to the witness stand by solicitor writings, but Jess Rhodes' battery of 4 lawyers protested that in North Carolina, a wife cannot be called as a witness against her husband, even if she wanted to testify. The state's representative agreed that she must be withdrawn as a witness. Ms. Rhodes laughed nervously, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, then spoke her only words about the homicide. I'd just like to say that, but her husband's lawyers were on their feet shouting objections. She smiled and left the stand. Lawyers, it's ridiculous. Coroner Dalton allowed Ms. Rhodes to testify about the pre-dawn ambush when she and Ball were shot at. At the time, a wife could testify against the husband in the case of assault on her. Chief Lindsay explained that he had heard talk of the early morning shooting at the Rhodes residence. He went there on Monday morning and found 5 empty .22 caliber shell casings about 22 steps from the Rhodes driveway. Those spent cartridges had been first seen on Sunday morning by Joe Wall, who lived across the street. This meant, in all likelihood, that a semi-automatic handgun was probably used in the shooting. Focusing on the critical 30-minute time frame, the police chief testified that he'd been at his post on Trade Street that Sunday morning, knowing nothing about the shooting incident on Markham Road earlier in the day. He left to take his wife to Sunday school at 10:05 or 10:15, and at that time he saw Jess Rhodes near the police station, a half a block from the theater, 25 to 30 minutes prior to the discovery of Ball's body. Policeman J.M. Melton testified that he saw Rhodes drive across from the police station where he called Crawford Walker out of his car. Chief Deputy Sel Edwards stated that Sheriff Lloyd Panther was ill at home at the time. More on that later. Edwards said that he had searched the Rhodes residence on Wednesday and found a copper whiskey still in the basement and live ammunition but no guns. In Jess Rhodes' bedroom, he found a pair of pants with a spot of blood on the hip. There was no mention of any collection of the pants or any testing of blood evidence other than to say that Edwards turned them over to Highway Patrol Officer Buck Boyles, a crony of Jess Rhodes. During the investigation, Patrol Captain Speed, great name for a patrol captain, I think, expressed concern to SBI agents that the Tryon-based patrolman had attended drinking parties with Rhodes and friends. Trooper Boyles was also said to have participated with Rhodes, Rob Ford, the coroner's juror-to-be, and Tryon Politico Harrison Bridgman in turning an entire Tryon grape vineyard into illegal brandy. The blood-stained trousers from Jess Rhodes' bedroom, potentially important evidence, were heard of no more. Patrolman Boyles and Deputy Sellers did take time to express to SBI investigators that they didn't think that Jess Rhodes killed Ed Ball, and they believed that Ball's florist friend, Ed Goodyear, was the best suspect, which made no sense. That was Tron's first known example of fake news. Yes, it's fake news, fake news. I said that 3 times. Florist Goodyear and Dr. George Vosberg testified, as did SBI agent Davis, who talked about the immediate movement of the victim's body and the destruction of the crime scene, also saying that he talked to Jess Rhodes after the arrest on Monday. The accused refused to go to Raleigh to take a lie detector test and would not answer questions because they might incriminate him. He did deny any knowledge of the Ball slaying, contending that he went to the American Legion in Tryon that night, returned home about 1 a.m. Sunday morning, and stayed there until later in the day. Throughout this inquest, Jess Rhodes was outwardly calm and leaned forward in his chair following the testimony. Attorney Redden told the coroner and jury in sum, quote, "Mr. Ridings is one of the best prosecutors in the land and qualified officers have made their investigations, yet there's been no testimony here by direct evidence, inference, or otherwise that would point to Jess Rhodes." The hearing lasted 1 hour and 10 minutes. The jury deliberated for just 7 more minutes before announcing to the packed courtroom that they couldn't say who took the life of Ed Ball. Prosecutor Ridings then asked for dismissal of the first-degree murder charge against Rhodes, and Justice of the Peace Alfred Gillum complied. Ridings added that he could reopen the case with an indictment at a later time if new or sufficient evidence was found. Now, this was a consequential and puzzling result for a charge of murder to be determined by a coroner's inquest, a proceeding presided over by a person untrained in the law and by a jury, especially a rigged one, with no knowledge of it. And add to that the conflicts of interest on the part of Coroner Dalton and several jurors. They'd be totally disqualified today. The state's solicitor then agreed to a $500 bond in the still pending charge that alleged that Jess Rhodes had assaulted his wife with a pistol. A hearing on that offense was set 2 weeks hence before Justice of the Peace Gillum, whose full-time employment was as a jeweler in Columbus. After the jury's finding was read, Jess Rhodes smiled at acquaintances who came forward to congratulate him. His wife left the courtroom with SBI agent Davis. After the disastrous coroner's inquest, Solicitor Ridings spoke with an SBI agent out of Polk County in Marion and was pessimistic about the chances of a successful prosecution in the murder case. He said that, quote, "Due to the setup there in Polk County at the present time, they'll do nothing with Rhodes but turn him loose." He further stated that a party in Polk County called him to say that he wanted Jess Rhodes out of jail. The prosecutor relied that he didn't think that jail was bothering Rhodes very much, in that he is said to be staying in the jailer's apartment rather than a cell, and enjoyed looking at a television, probably before the rest of us had a television around here, and had likely never been behind lock and key. He further opined to Agent Davis that, quote, if you work up a good case, I don't believe they'll convict this man in Polk County. Writings also related that he'd been told that immediately after Jess Rhodes was released from jail, Sheriff Panther came out of illness and obscurity and was seen later in the day riding roads around Tryon in his sheriff's automobile. The preliminary hearing in the assault case. That's Stella Rhodes and the SBI agent from Asheville, Claude Davis. In the preliminary hearing on Friday, the 19th of June, Stella Rhodes was allowed to fully describe the early morning shooting. The Greenville News headline read, Tryon Politico hears wife testify, Rhodes held for grand jury. Again, the unair-conditioned courtroom was packed. Did you go back, Ambrose?
No.
Hey, you heard enough. Okay. Mrs. Rhodes testified in detail in front of the crowd, saying that she and Ball had been riding in his car and drove into the driveway of the Rhodes house at about 2:30 a.m. on May the 24th. She opened the door to get out and saw Ball look around as if frightened. She looked back and saw her husband near the corner of the car with a flashlight in his left hand and something else in his right. Ball pulled her down, slammed the door, started the car, and then there was a shot, then two more as they sped away. Ball was hit in the right shoulder. Under a street light near the colored school, as it was described, he took his shirt off. This is out Markham. She made a compress and put it on his wound. They drove on looking for a way to the main road and met her husband on Trash Pile Street, which is Howard Street, below street, near the city dump. City dump was down at the time, those of the river forever remember the city dump, which burned all the time, was down at sort of the end of Howard Street, down in the low area there along Vaughn's Creek. Rhodes stopped and exited his vehicle when Ball and Stella Rhodes encountered him on Howard Street. Ball cut off the lights of his car and left at a high rate of speed, chased by Jess Rhodes. Ball and Ms. Rhodes could not find a doctor in Landrum, so they went to a physician's home in Tryon, where she stayed in the car while Ball's shoulder was attended to. They left, and she was led out at her daughter Janelle Dalton's place just before dawn, and she told her what had happened. Stella Rhodes also testified that her husband had an armory at their house that included 38 and 22 caliber firearms. This is Stella with her attorney. She employed a private attorney from Shelby, John Mahoney. The examination of Stella Rhodes was conducted by her out-of-town attorney, Mr. Mahoney from Shelby. The hearing was marked by repeated clashes between Mahoney and former Congressman Redden, who rigorously cross-examined Mrs. Rhodes. Under cross, she stated that she had known Ball for about eight months and that her conscience was not hurting her then or now. Redden asked sarcastically if she was doing anything wrong out with another man at 2 a.m. She said no. When asked if she had told her husband that she was going out with Ball, she said he wasn't home. He'd left about 7:15 that evening. She stated that she called Ed Ball at 11 that night. He picked her up about 11:30. They rode around until 2 a.m., didn't stop along the road, and had nothing to drink. On two earlier occasions, she had driven to Greenville with Ball on Easter Sunday and once to Hendersonville for dinner. Mrs. Rhodes said to her husband's attorney that Ball was a very fine gentleman. My husband was out with another woman anyway and had been gone for 2 weeks at a time. She said that she was not trying to justify her conduct, but to clear Ball's name. And I'll read you this short paragraph for Andy's benefit over there. Let me see if I can read what I marked through. In continued clashes between the lawyers, Attorney Mahoney said to the presiding official, the answers he gives don't suit him, referring to Redden. Redden said, leave me out of this and address your comments to the court. Mahoney then said to the Justice of the Peace, he's trying my patience. Redden said, I don't care if I am. So you knew Monroe Sr.
Very well. And Marlon Jr.
Yeah, and Junior. Daughter Janelle Rhodes Dalton testified that her mother woke her up at 5:15 a.m. sitting on her back steps and said, "Your daddy shot at me. I think he hit me in the leg," but there was no injury there. Attorney Redden asked the daughter if she herself didn't carry a .38 pistol, and she said that she did, but she denied that it was for her father. Jess Rhodes sat beside Congressman Redden on the top there. Wish that was a little bigger, but that's the scene in the courtroom. Jess Rhodes sat next to Congressman Redden and in the company of his other 3 attorneys. He smoked several cigarettes during his wife's testimony. This is in the courtroom. Leaned forward and kept his eyes on her face. He did not testify. Now let me point out that I'll just speak up. That's Congressman Redden. That's Jess Rhodes, Phil McFarland, J. Lee Lavender, Monroe Redden Jr. Now who's this other guy? Justice of the Peace Jeweler Gillum bound the assault matter over to the grand jury at the August session of Superior Court. Incredibly, the Justice of the Peace, in announcing his decision publicly, said to Jess Rhodes, I think you were justified in what you did. In effect, stating that he thought Rhodes was the shooter, but thought that he was justified in going after Paul and his wife when he discovered them together. This is in spite of Rhodes's consistent denial. He said, I think you were justified in what you did. The fair and impartial jurist then had his smiling photograph made with the politically influential defense team. So there's your Justice of the Peace sitting at the defense table. Needless to say, the Justice of the Peace was beholden to the political establishment as an appointed or as an elected official. Continuing his investigation, FBI agent Davis was called to the office of Southern Merchandising President W.A. Shorty McDonald. Familiar names. Who told Davis that friends and cronies of Jess Rhodes, including Crawford Walker and his son, were following agents when they were in Tryon in Polk County. Also, he had called the governor concerning the sheriff in his department. McDonald also passed on a tip having to do with 2 Tryon citizens who were said to have helpful information in the case. And here's what they said. Following that lead, Agent Davis was directed to an individual who had been heard to state that he was going north on Trade Street in Tryon at about 10 a.m. on the 24th of May and met Jess Rhodes traveling south driving a Jeep truck. Rhodes suddenly turned left in front of oncoming traffic and stopped his vehicle crosswise in a parking space in front of the theater. He left his truck blocking traffic and walked in the direction of the theater door. On that same day, Jess Rhodes' friend Crawford Walker came to this person's home and told him to keep his mouth shut about seeing Rhodes that morning. When Agent Davis located and spoke to this person, who was said to have seen this, he told the investigator that he wasn't sure he could identify the driver and the kind of truck. Agent Davis also spoke to a second person, a respected downtown merchant whose business was on the theater block. He said that within 2 minutes of 10 a.m. on May 24th, he'd been traveling south on Trade, 2 cars behind Jess Rhodes, who was driving his Jeep truck. Rhodes made the turn in front of oncoming vehicles and into the curb in front of the theater, blocking traffic. He saw Rhodes jump out of the truck, but couldn't say if he went into the theater. That second person was positive in his identification. The other witness to this occurrence visited him and cautioned him that, quote, Crawford Walker came down here and told me to forget about seeing Jess Rhodes, and you better do the same thing. Tryon and Polk County get outside attention. Matters in Polk County attracted outside attention. In late July, an editorial in the Asheville Times titled Tryon Mystery recounted the well-known facts of the Ball homicide and noticed that, quote, no one has ever been indicted for the murder of Edward Ball. The case is a mystery, a tight-lipped one. For few persons will talk about it. There's very little evidence of a local investigation. 10 weeks is a long time for a murder, whatever the circumstances or even the provocation, to go unexplained in North Carolina when all the facts of record are considered. Surely the verdict of a coroner's jury is not a satisfied disposition of the Tryon mystery. Surely North Carolina cannot let its conscience rest on the assumption that justice, any kind of justice, has been done in the Ball case. After all, a man was murdered in a semi-public place in Tryon. What's going to be done about it? There was another letter to the editor of the Asheville paper from Wayne Creasman, a legendary Tryon citizen who acted as our weatherman for as many as 5 decades. He wrote, "Polk County as of late has many things that stink. You end up asking, what's going to be done about it? Exactly nothing, brother, except some thumb twiddling on the part of both local and state powers that be. What a mess, and nobody to clean it up. Politics? We'll give any other county 4 aces and we'll win the hand. Any takers?" The murder in Tryon also gained the attention of Governor William B. Olmsted when Ed Ball's father met with him to complain about the way that Polk County law enforcement was conducting their investigation into his son's death. The governor had also received letters on the subject. Shorty McDonald, the head of Tryon's Southern Mercerizing, was a political heavyweight who had been the governor's campaign manager in the Tryon area of the state. He wrote a letter to and visited with his friend Governor Olmsted in Raleigh to discuss circumstances in Polk County. As the August court session approached, the Burlington Times ran an article titled "Public Officials Gain the Court's Top Attention. Polk County officials, current or former, were named on the criminal calendar for the upcoming court session." A petition had been filed by 10 good citizens, as was required by the law, to remove the elected sheriff, Lloyd Panther, for habitual drunkenness, misconduct, and repeated arrests for intoxication. The sheriff blamed his political opponents and those damn Yankees down here who want to run everything. Those are his words, not mine. A petition. The grand jury was to consider an indictment naming Rhodes in an indictment for assault with a deadly weapon and murder, Rhodes being the former county accountant, as recounted by the paper. Carl Story, former county commissioner, was charged with an unprovoked assault on tax supervisor James Johnson in Johnson's office at the old courthouse. Story, a substantial landowner, was upset by what he considered to be an unfair assessment of the tax values of his real estate holdings. Third, the trial of the assault case in Polk Superior Court. The first order of business for Superior Court Judge Quincy Kellogg Nimitz, I love that name, from Fayetteville, at the August 27th court session was the petition to remove Sheriff Panther. The judge observed that the sheriff should be a moral leader and an example in the county. He then reviewed rumors that had spread all over the state about the indifference to solving the murder at the Tryon Theater and the very bad situation that had developed in Polk County. The sheriff's matter, though, was continued. A jury of 11 men and 1 woman was then selected to hear and decide the assault case against Jess Rhodes, that is for assault on his wife, by shooting her in the automobile. And at long last, he, that is Jess, took the stand where he denied firing shots at his wife or at Ed Ball. He said that he was at home in the bed when the shooting occurred in front of his house, that he knew nothing of the incident until 2 days later and was not much concerned, quote him. He went on to say that before May the 23rd, he loved his wife, never mistreated her, and had not suspected her of misconduct. He said they'd separated twice, but that was not because he was running around with women. On the night of Saturday, May the 23rd, he stated that he was at the American Legion Hall in Tryon until about 1 a.m. He went home, went to bed, and was at no time on Trash Pile Road, or Howard. He got up at 7:30 in the morning and went to his farm in the Tryon city limits out Markham. He spent 30 to 45 minutes feeding his pigs, returned home, read the newspaper for an hour, went uptown to get another newspaper, and was back home by 9 a.m. 20 minutes later, he drove to town again. Then at around 10 a.m., he picked up Crawford Walker, who rode with him back out to the farm. They returned at 11. His contention being that he was with Crawford Walker and not in the town of Tryon when Ball was shot and killed. He stated that his .38 caliber pistol had been stolen a year prior to these events. I suppose that was on the connection, that some connection was made between that pistol and the murder. He said, well, it was stolen from me a year ago. I've heard that before. On cross-examination, Jess Rhodes had said late on Sunday afternoon, his friend Harrison Bridgman came to see him, and that they went to Bridgman's house to spend the night. Bridgman was a Tryon realtor, all-around political heavyweight, and was a special deputy under Sheriff Panther and a known Jess Rhodes crony. On Monday morning, Bridgman went to town and returned to say that SBI men wanted to talk to him, that is Jess, and he told them where to find his firearms. Crawford Walker, whose name keeps coming up here, a bootlegging crony of Jess Rhodes, testified as an alibi witness saying that he was with Rhodes at the time of the murder between 10 and 11 a.m. on that Sunday morning out at the Rhodes Vineyard. Before the trial, Tryon Mayor C.D. Stevens opined to SBI agents that Crawford Walker was a close friend of Jess Rhodes and would lie for him and would not reveal anything to officers that were detrimental to Rhodes. This is Rhodes' alibi witness, bear in mind. In his alibi testimony, Crawford Walker was contradicted by a number of persons who put Jess Rhodes in and around Tryon between 10 and 11 on the morning of the murder. Among those witnesses were Police Chief Lindsay, Assistant Chief Melton, and Sheriff's Chief Deputy Sel Edwards. Specifically, they put Rhodes picking up Crawford Walker for sure, but at about 10:25 and then returning with him at 10:40. Leaving time for Jess Rhodes to spend as much as 20 minutes at the Tryon Theater just after 10 a.m. The trial jury deliberated for 5 hours but was hopelessly deadlocked, and a mistrial was declared by Judge Nimitz, who all agreed conducted himself admirably in the proceedings. He ordered a rehearing at the next term of court, which was scheduled for February 1954. The court session closed with no indictment submitted by the prosecutor to the grand jury charging Jess Rhodes with murder, and we'll hear no more of it. At that point, the papers and the public might have come to suffer from a degree of Jess Rhodes fatigue. It was the end of a long, hot summer. For months thereafter, there seemed to have been little or no mention of the affair in the media until Reverend H.A. Prine's December letter to the editor of the Asheville Citizens, A Card at Christmas. In it, the Methodist minister went on to say, "A few days after Edward was buried, I visited with the Ball family in Fuquay-Varina, it's near Raleigh. The father had but recently returned from Tryon, where he had been told that there was little chance for justice being given. How weary and torn he looked. The mother pointed at Edward's picture on the piano. Words were difficult. After a short visit, we had a prayer together, and I went on my way with a heavy heart, headed back to Tryon." P.S. I have an editorial from your paper headed Tryon Mystery, published 10 weeks after the murder. It's now over 6.5 months since Edward Ball was brutally murdered. You say, what's going to be done about it? Well, we still wonder, don't we, Mr. Editor? A less than satisfying conclusion. On Monday, January the 25th, 1954, the spring term of Polk Superior Court opened in Columbus with the Honorable Judge and future Governor Dan K. Moore of Silva presiding, and with the retrial of the Rhodes assault case on the calendar. On the following day, the Tryon Daily Bulletin curb reporter carried the news that the case against Jess L. Rhodes, charged with assault, was dismissed because Mrs. Rhodes refused to prosecute. As best can be determined, the Tryon Theater murder of 1953 was never again mentioned on the pages of the Bulletin until this past Sunday. A 66-year silence. In consistent fashion, the Asheville Citizen-Times gave more expansive coverage. It quoted solicitor writings as saying that Mrs. Rhodes does not want to prosecute, didn't want to press charges, and I will not do it. Privately, the prosecutor said that he was dismissing the charge of assault on Stella Rhodes because he didn't think he could get a conviction. He added that he had a letter from attorney John Mahoney, her private prosecutor in the case, her private prosecutor, to the effect that Mahoney no longer wanted to be connected with the matter. Ms. Rhodes told SBI agent Davis that she wanted to drop the assault charge because of heart and other health problems caused by the strain and anxiety that she'd experienced. She also said that she did not think that another trial would result in a conviction because her husband's political friends and public officials want to cover up for him. When the citizen contacted Mr. Mahoney, he said that he thought the case had been dismissed because of the illness of Mrs. Rhodes and her daughter, that he still represented her, and that the case was by no means at an end, but it was. 2 years later, in May 1956, Agent Davis visited, he stayed with this investigation. It's just incredible. Fighting upstream. Davis visited Stella Rhodes, who for 6 to 8 months had been spending weekends next door with her mother, Miss Stredwick. She reported that Jess had been drunk and was firing a long gun at their, that is Jess and Stella's house next door. She thought that her husband would kill her if he could, and she had moved in with her daughter, Janelle Dalton, which was out in the vicinity of the blockhouse, as I understand. Also, in May 1956, a new Polk County Sheriff, Lloyd Westbrook, and federal agents raided an active still in Jess Rhodes' basement. He was convicted of manufacturing whiskey and served 18 months in federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. A little bit of justice. Several times, and more than 26 months after the Ball murder, SBI agent Davis interviewed one of the men who had seen Jess Rhodes pull into the curb in front of the Tryon Theater during the time frame of the homicide. But by then, Rhodes was safely in federal custody. But the potential witness, quote, refused to make a statement because he was afraid of Jess Rhodes and his cronies. Jess and Stella's daughter, Janelle Dalton, made this comment to Agent Davis about her father. I can tell you what's going to happen to Jess Rhodes. He's going to get his damn head blown off, and when it happens, you can start looking for me. The murder of the theater man ended as it began, with questions and conduct that caused justice never to fully have its day. The matter went dormant, but was not forgotten by those of us who recall the events that so disturbed our community 66 years ago. After that, apparently, Jess and Stella Rhodes continued to at least coexist. They died in 1975 and 76 respectively, and are buried in a Rhodes family plot in the old Tryon Cemetery within earshot of where the early morning shooting on May 24, 1953 took place. Edward Ball is interred in Fuquay Arena, Wake County, North Carolina. Court reform that this affair sorely indicated a need for. Court reform came to North Carolina in the late 1960s when the troublesome system of local courts that had roots in the Constitution of 1868 was replaced by a statewide uniform court, General Court of Justice. About 2 weeks after the Ball murder, the Tryon Theater, ever resilient and tasteful, this is 2 weeks after the murder, offered a terrifying voodoo show featuring blood-spattered thrillers, the most startling horror show of the century. It is announced that all undertakers and gravediggers will be admitted for free. Scott Gale, any publicity is good publicity, right? Today, however, the venerable 80-year-old Tryon Theater is enjoying a stunning renaissance under the stewardship of Scott and Gail Lane. Let's give them a hand. Regrettably, the iconic Tryon police kiosk was torn down and is only a memory. Here it's depicted in a drawing by Ronnie Marcello. So, who killed the theater man? Let me say that before I got into all this, and even when I read the newspaper reports, the things that came out publicly in court, and on the basis of those things in the paper And, you know, what I'd always kind of learned and heard, and the kind of the scuttlebutt around Tryon, my feeling was that there was maybe a 40% chance that Jess Rhodes committed this murder. I come away now 90% certain, at least, maybe more, that Jess Rhodes killed Ed Ball. And that's one reason we're here today, the main reason we're here today, in my mind, to throw a little bit of light on this, maybe briefly revisit. I believe that the person most surprised that Jess Rhodes escaped justice in the murder of the theater man was Jess Rhodes himself. And as they say about Grandma's nightgown, I think that about covers it all. Unless